All right, so I'm going to make a video today piggybacking off of something I heard just a few moments ago by Sadhguru. And this is something I've heard many times in my life, but it hit me this morning in a particular way that prompted me to make this video. Now, with a lot of videos that I've attempted to make that aren't posted, I'm often trying to bite off more than I can chew. And in the process of making the video, I might sometimes wander a bit. So I appreciate you going on this journey with me. And we're going to start with what Sadhguru said. And he said something along the lines of not knowing is the basis for all knowing. Some of you have probably heard of the idea that there are three categories. One is the known, what we know. Second is the category of the known unknown, things we know we don't know. I don't know much about repairing vehicles. I know that. The third category is the unknown unknown, things we don't know, like in entire fields of knowledge that we've never have even been exposed to. We didn't even know they were fields of knowledge. So as we grow developmentally, I heard Mark Manson, who wrote the book The Subtle Art of Not Giving a, and I'm going to try to keep this family friendly and probably YouTube friendly. I don't know that I won't swear in some other videos, but for this one I'm not gonna. So anyway, Mark Manson said that something along the lines of we go from being more ignorant to less ignorant. It's not like we're going from ignorant to smart necessarily. We should be mindful of thinking of ourselves as smart. We should be mindful of thinking of ourselves as being too all-knowing, right? We understand the dangers, hopefully, of grandiosity and inflation. And yet, if we look at the developmental process of life, what we see is, again, we go from knowing basically nothing to hopefully knowing some things in life, okay? And we do. We learn things as we go. Alfred Adler, who was a psychologist, he talked about how we go from inferiority. We start from inferiority as infants, okay? And as toddlers. We can't do all the things that the adults do. We don't know the things the adults know. So we start off from a place of what he calls inferiority. And he's the one that came up with the inferiority-superiority complex stuff, okay? So we start off from this place of inferiority in that way, okay? And our way of trying to overcome inferiority is typically not trying to be average. It's not trying to be equal to. It's trying to be greater than, better than, no more than. So we, in a sense, we overcompensate and we try to be superior to others. Okay? In that process, there's a lot of hubris. And it makes me think of two things. And I do have a few notes here if you see me looking down. The first one is Icarus, the story of Icarus. Icarus is the young man whose father makes some wings for him so he can fly out of the labyrinth. Because they're both stuck in the labyrinth, I think. And he's trying to help his son get out of that labyrinth. So he builds him these wings. But Icarus doesn't heed the warning. And the warning is that be careful as you fly out of here. Don't get too close to the sun and don't get too close to the water because the vapors from the water or something will drag you down. And if you get too close to the sun, it's going to melt your wings and you're going to crash. And of course, Icarus, feeling good, flying, he flies too close to the sun, melts his wings, and he crashes into the water. In some ways, it symbolizes the idea of becoming too grandiose, too inflated, too arrogant and haughty, and having to hit rock bottom due to that sense of being better than, of thinking we know it all. If we're honest, we all know we have gone through a lot of this in our lives. Mark Twain has that good quote, and I don't remember the particular ages in this quote. It's something like, when I was a boy of 14, my father was the dumbest man I knew. I could hardly stand to be around the old man. By the time I was 21, I was surprised at how much smarter my father had gotten in just 7 years. And it's funny, and it might have been when I was a boy at the age of 7. By the time I was 14, I realized this about my father. Whatever the ages are, it's kind of irrelevant for the sake of this discussion. But it's this idea of, the kid's starting to realize his father is smarter than he thought, but he still doesn't realize that he's the one who's actually maturing and growing and starting to see what his father probably knew all along. And yeah, that's part of the way we are. When we're young and we're developing, we have this push against our parents, against our churches, against our schools. And to some extent, it's because we start to realize that they do have faults that we didn't see when we were younger. When we're younger, we tend to idolize things. We tend to have ideals. And we start to realize that people and institutions do not live up to those ideals. And we could give in to disappointment. The water, we could, or we could try to be better than them and fly too close to the sun. And this is why humility is pushed so hard and why it needs to be taught, is because we do have a proclivity within us to want to superiorize ourselves in particular ways. And there's no one that I know of that is above that. There's a power dynamic in play when we try to know more than others, when we try to superiorize ourselves with our knowledge and our intellect. Carl Jung warns about that quite a bit, and I'm going to bring him up again here in a moment. Adler is basically teaching us that when we go from feeling inferior and we try to make ourselves superior, that what we're basically doing is we're losing our sense of social feeling. We're trying to, instead of being a part of the group and being cooperative, we're stuck in competitiveness. And instead of being part of the circle of humanity, everybody like kind of, in arms together, circling around the sacred center, which we might think of, as God. In a sense, we're trying to be the center still. We're still trying to be the center of the world, maybe. And as we grow older, we begin to be more content with not having to know everything, not having to be right all the time, not having to prove everything. we're more okay saying, okay, I guess I was wrong. I thought I was mistaken. Oh my gosh, you were wrong. You were mistaken. And you can see in our culture how, in many ways, it's very immature, or still developing, would be another way of saying it, because so many people are so terrified to be exposed as being wrong about something. And there's a whole genre of videos about, trying to expose the hypocrisies of people, and how stupid they are. And this is, it's like the Inquirer, that magazine that used to, maybe it's still there if there's magazines up near the checkout lines at a grocery store, but it's all this parasitism in a particular way of trying to find the mistakes of people, trying to find where there's contradictoriness, and everybody is contradictory, especially in a long enough timeline, especially in a culture where everything's so recorded. It's not hard to go back and find things about people that don't mesh with how they are now, where they used to say one thing and now they're saying another thing. And in some ways that also makes sense if you think about polarities. Sometimes we go from one way and we ping all the way to the other way, like we overcorrect the ship, and then we're trying to steer back to center. But in that overcorrection, it can definitely appear contradictory or hypocritical. And there's a difference between contradictoriness and being hypocritical. I don't want to get into all that necessarily right now, but I'm just saying, in our developmental process, we're not necessarily going to be always consistent. And consistency is something that actually, takes some time to develop. What should we be? Should we really be consistent, or should we change? And there's an importance to having that stability and that consistency. But people that get locked into consistency too soon, they become very stagnant and fossilized, and often think they know more than they do. It's kind of like, I'm sure when you were young, you knew people when you were probably in middle school, even high school, college. They seem to already be fossilized into what they know. They weren't wise beyond their years, but they pretended to be wise beyond their years. They were not what you would think of as the old soul, but they were instead the person that was a little too attached to the ideas of their parents and grandparents. They were like many versions of the adults. And all of us probably fall into some of that as well. Okay? So, in our developmental process, there's got to be some flexibility and some stabilizing. These things go together. As we move towards having a little bit more wisdom, we start to have a blending of what seem to be opposites. There's more of a sense of integration of two things, two sides of a coin, realizing that sometimes this side is maybe a little bit more appropriate, sometimes this side is a little more appropriate, depending on context. I've heard it said that for every truism, there is like an equal but opposite truism. I think sometimes we get really attached to particular words about knowledge. There's Gnosticism, it means I know, and agnosticism, I don't know. Well, eventually those two things kind of have a way of overlapping, and there is a knowing and the not knowing. And we can kind of smile at life, and we don't have to know everything, and we can be wrong, and it's not gonna just destroy us. our whole sense of identity doesn't have to be ruined because we didn't know something, because we were wrong about something. Oh no, somebody pointed out that you were wrong. It's kind of funny because there's a fear component here, and people are so afraid that it will stagnate people. And I definitely speak from experience. I would like to be right. I would like to at least not share things or say things that could, like, let's say, be misleading. So there's some inherent wisdom in not wanting to be wrong. But there's also wisdom in accepting you can't be right all the time. And that there's no development if you're not willing to be wrong. And in an age of capture and recording, people are either doubling down on what they're wrong about, or they're self-censoring and won't speak because they're afraid that that somebody's going to have an angle on why they're wrong. Because there's always like another angle on something. Another thing about certainty as opposed to uncertainty. You've probably heard the expression that, like, why is it that when we're young, we're so certain, but then as we get older, we seem to be less certain? Maybe even we have more doubt. Or that, why is it that ignorant people and less knowledgeable people seem to really act like they know, and wiser people tend to, again, have some healthy doubt and uncertainty? Well, confidence is an attractive quality, and some might say it's more attractive than humility, depending on how one wears humility. Now, some would also say that confidence can be unattractive, as in, when people are arrogant and think they know more than they do. But it's in the eye of the beholder. And a lot of people end up mating with people that are attractive because they seem so confident. And then after a few years of being with this person, they realize that person doesn't know what they're talking about, and they become like unattracted to them or whatnot. Humility can be worn in a kind of an unattractive way, where it's like too meek, if that's possible. It's like too uncertain. So ultimately, it's like this fine blend of confidence and humility that we have to walk in, that makes us more balanced people. So I want to go back to Jung, and then we'll end this video. One thing Jung talked about in a book called, the book is called Jung and the Story of Our Time, by a man named Lorenz van der Post, who was a friend of Jung's, or a colleague of Jung's in some sort of way. They'd gone to Africa together, I believe. And in this book that van der Post wrote, he says that Jung had said that, be careful about thinking you understand just because you have some knowledge. So just because we do know some things, that doesn't mean we understand what we know. And Jung was talking about this in a therapeutic situation, that you might start knowing some things about the person in front of you, but that doesn't mean you understand why they're like that, or why they think like that, why that's their story. And he said that, like, the best way to engage this stuff is not from the therapist as superior to the patient and all of that, but he says that they should come together as two mutually clouded souls, both searching to see what the truth of the matter is. And, he talked about how if you think you know and understand too much, that you kind of can really destroy the person in front of you, because He says if you give somebody the impression that you understand them better than they understand themselves, that can sometimes take away from their reason for existing. Because what happens if we ultimately think we know everything? We destroy the mystery. And the mystery is what life is about. And this is also the challenge of science. And this is why faith too. It's like this idea of how can you blend the knowing and the not knowing together in a healthy way? Because everybody's trying to superiorize themselves, whether they're in science or whether they're in religion. The reason they want the answer, for the most part, seems to me, right? I know, seems to me that that they want to have power. They want to have control and potentially to dominate others. And a lot of times there's at a fundamental evolutionary level, they want to reproduce. It's like politics and religion. It's a mating game. Lionel Tiger and Robin Fox wrote this book called The Imperial Animal. And they have a chapter on there. And politics is a breeding process. Okay? And politics is about power dynamics and about the ability for resources to flow. Okay? I can't get too deep into that because I don't have time, but it's a wonderful book. I haven't finished reading it, but I've read a good bit of it, and it's definitely worth looking at. But destroying the mystery, too much biblicism, what in divinity school I was taught it's called bibliolatry. It's like creating an idol of the Bible. Some would call it a particular type of fundamentalism, biblical literalism, and all those things are a little different, or a lot different, but they all kind of point to the idea of a reductionism. Reductionism is a way of trying to, I've got the truth. And you see how science does it in a particular way, and you'll see how religion does it in a particular way. And connecting those two things together is a desire to be better than others. Desire to climb up that status ladder. And why? Because we're creatures that, like other creatures, status and mating go together. Breeding. Now, there's more to the story, obviously, but I think that is something that is worthy of consideration. Also, the idea of one of the biggest dangers in life is taking a partial truth or a truth and blowing it up, exaggerating it, or minimizing it in a way that distorts the overall picture of truth. So imagine truth is made up of a lot of little truths. And if you take one particular truth and do the wrong thing with it, you can create a lie. Thomas Merton, in his book, Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander, talks about how propaganda works. Propaganda doesn't even have to have a lie. You could have you could use 10 truths, string it together, and create one fabrication, one illusion. So we must be wise. We must admit we don't know. We should be careful clinging too hardly to any truth in a particular way, because the other thing that happens is recontextualization. You may know something and be real certain about it, but then when you start to understand some other things, it recontextualizes maybe the meaning of what we know in relation to other things that we know. So I think that's a pretty good place to end. I think that's encapsulated what I wanted to get out in this video. And I really do appreciate your time and energy watching this. Thank you so very much. I wish you a wonderful day. God bless, and namaste.